On the internet, it is easy for a criminal to create a fictitious identity to perpetrate frauds, extortions, and other crimes.
Yeah, so historically, the use or abuse of the internet for national means had been confined to intelligence collection of some kind or other. So run-of-the-mill finding secrets, people being careless, or keeping an eye on people. But increasingly, because all sorts of critical infrastructure and emerging critical infrastructure is being connected to the internet for a number of reasons, economic and social, political, whatever, that means that those critical infrastructures can be held at risk. And once you can hold something at risk, you have leverage as a nation state over the entity whose critical infrastructure you hold at risk. So in some ways, it's not really any different than having armies, and you build up the armies because you can threaten the opponent. And even if you're seeking peace, you still build up an army so that you deter the opponent from attacking you or pushing you around. The whole nuclear detente, the MAD doctrine, mutually assured destruction, whether you believe in it or not, the strategists certainly believed in that, and the politicians did. And so they, both sides, or all sides, I should say, that have nukes, build them up so that they deter others from using. So the same holds for cyber, to the extent that these critical infrastructures are online and can be affected, not just by stealing information, but by manipulating some physical aspect of that infrastructure behind the internet-facing side of it. That means that they can be used either to deter or for some kind of response that is less than kinetic, or simply to send a political message, again, without necessarily and directly causing, say, casualties, human lives to be lost or anything of that sort.
And so the example that, as you were talking, the example that keeps running around in my head is, the electric power grid, right? The electric, how the electric, this is the one that you hear, at least we hear about, the most, the vulnerability of the electric power grid. It's in the news all the time. So far we haven't had, big, huge outages, or maybe we're not aware of them, but that's the kind of vulnerability you're talking about that ultimately will affect consumers, right? Attacks on other kinds of infrastructures that we don't necessarily see, but certainly if someone was able to hack into to the power company and shut down all the nuclear power plants on the East Coast or something like that, obviously that will have a big impact. I think that's the kind of nation state like action that would have direct impact on us.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's perhaps the most dramatic, and I think I've seen it on at least a couple of movies or TV series. Yeah. But really the same holds for any other kind of infrastructure that can be affected. And the truth of the matter is almost everything is computerized, and almost everything is or is about to become connected for convenience or efficiency. And so that opens up the scope for what can be done.
And so what are the kinds of security threats that people are talking about in 5G that are new or different? Because I think people are somewhat used to the security threats of their existing phones, but there must be new stuff in 5G. And so I'd love to hear what that might be. Or maybe maybe it's just security as a whole, or there's things that are 5G unique.
Well, so 5G is really both a specific set of standards and this big amorphous marketing entity that people and companies project whatever they want to on, right? At the end of the day, what has been defined are things like the radio access interface. How does your phone talk to a cell tower? The protocols for that, the security for that, and then certain aspects of what kinds of services are expected to reside within the infrastructure and are offered to the users. Now, beyond that, many of those sort of the specifics are not necessarily all tied down, and that doesn't mean that's all there is to have about 5G. So, having said that, I would think of what we're doing less as trying to fix problems with 5G as we know it, and more as looking at 5G as a tabula rasa, as a clean slate with certain features that were already anticipated by the standards and by the whole sort of ecosystem, the ISP ecosystem, and can we use those to do security better in that environment? And that is motivated both because we want to do better, but also because the expected use of 5G in terms of what kinds of applications and pervasiveness and so on is going to explode, much more than current cell phones are used.
Because I'm really curious on your perspective of, security designed into systems from the very beginning, because it sounds even the way that security has evolved over 20, 30, 50 years is we build a piece of hardware and we connect them and they do things, and then, oh yeah, that's right, we need to make it secure, so we we overlay it. And it seems like traditionally systems have been designed that way, although maybe you kind of hinted in 5G that maybe there was some inherent security designed in. And I wonder, is that what's your perspective on that? The idea that we might design security at the transistor level, and then we would design a security at the chip level, and then we would design security at and we kind of do it at each layer so that it's kind of like inherently part of a system, so I'm curious about your perspective on that and how that is evolving as security as an inherent piece, just like transistors and electrons and wires are inherent to the operation of systems. Shouldn't security be that as well?
Yeah. So traditionally, security wasn't designed in, both because of perceived or real complexity, and two, lack of tools, and three, lack of motivation to put it in. Honestly, why would a hardware manufacturer put in security features if nobody's going to pay for them? Even if the end users wanted them, if they're not going to pay for them, why would they spend the make the investment? So those things have changed over time, and they keep changing. Meaning, certainly people to a larger than before extent are willing to pay for security features. Now, how much and how effective, right? So what the cost-benefit ratio there is all up for debate. But increasingly in the past 10 and even more so maybe the past 5 years, we've seen a lot of push at all the layers, starting from sort of transistors, hardware, chips, low-level software, high-level software, all the way as high up as we can do it, to have tools and design patterns that the software engineers, the system engineers can easily take advantage of. Because that's when these things will happen. If you think of security as either the pixie dust that is sprinkled over a system once it's been designed, or as what needs to happen by bringing the security people by themselves to look at and add things, then you're going to lose. You're going to lose because there aren't enough of us, security people, and really we get in the way. And we slow things down because all kinds of objections. So unless the default sort of output of a design and development and maintenance process of a system, software, hardware, whatever, is to be as secure as we can make it. There's no such thing as perfectly, but as secure as we can make it, we're never going to really get there. Now, personally, I'm a little pessimistic about the prospect of shutting out the vast majority of attackers, but that's not to say that we can't raise the bar enough that, if you remember the example of the first tier, second tier, third tier kind of adversary and sophistication, we can at least take the first tier out, and then we can focus resources on the more sophisticated and fewer bad guys.
So I really, your comment about designing security in, I'll take one step further because I'm proud. I programmed a microprocessor at one time, right? And so I think what you're describing is, whether it's even at the instruction set level or whatever, having either designing at the very, very, finest grain level, a transistor or a circuit, I think you're saying things are very likely to evolve where tools for the designers will be at their disposal should they choose to use them, right? And so for some applications and some microprocessors, whatever, no, it's not needed. And for others, that inherent security will be needed at the beginning. And so it will be an add-on, but it'll be an add-on at a much, much lower level for which designers will have the ability to turn on or not. Is that how you see it? Are we there today, or you see that's kind of where like inherent security is headed?
Well, so you're right, and I think there are certain features that exist even on commodity processors or processors that are coming out, and there's work, for example, on goes into the latest or one of the latest ARM processors on this capability scheme that has at least 20 years of research, actually probably close to 30 years of research behind it. And finally, it's baked into hardware. Now, it took 30 years to get that feature that is considered kind of a really important way of separating, of keeping bad data from good data, or bad code from good code, right? So at a really fundamental level, keeping things apart and minimizing exposure within a system. The question is, well, how long is it going to take now the operating system vendors to actually use those? And how long is it going to take for APIs or primitives to be exposed to the application developers? How long until the compilers take advantage of them? And so on, right? Because some of these attacks, it doesn't do you much good to have something in the hardware, a feature, because the attack happens at a much higher level. So there are many attacks that stay within the browser, for example. It won't do you a whole lot of good against these attacks to have a secure processor. An insecure processor is going to be just as good. If you want to take it a step further, we see in the news a lot about what are called influence operations that are really reach out through cyberspace to impact the views of people, try to manipulate the views of people, which is actually part of cyber writ large. Well, it doesn't matter how secure your processor and your system or your network is. The attacks there happen sort of at a different semantic level. So it's, as Terry Pratchett, or to paraphrase Terry Pratchett, one of my favorite authors, it's turtles and elephants all the way down, referring to Discworld. Really fun series of fiction books. So that is to say, yes, we're going to see things in hardware, and we are seeing things hardware, but there are primitives that need to be built in higher levels as well.
So, one of the things we always talk about on the Uncommon Engineers, what's your path? How did you find your way to the career that you have now? Because a lot of our audience is junior high school students, even Georgia Tech students that are really curious about your path and some of your passions. So how'd you decide to do what you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And looking back, there's probably a number of different points. I'd say the two earliest, I was in high school, and one of my good friends at the time had just been admitted to university, and he invited me to visit him, and they had a computer terminal room, which I had a PC at home, but I didn't have one of those Unix systems. And so he said, hey, here, play with it, just to see something different. And so very quickly, I found an administrative application, which, however, did not allow me to go deeper. And so I spent the next hour finding a way to bypass it. And I was successful, having never seen that system. And I said, this is fun, sort of bypassing security mechanisms. Fun. So I always wanted to do computer science, computers at the time. That kind of nudged me in the direction of security. And then in my senior year, I think it was my senior year in college, after I had been dabbling in security, I had a professor who has since become a close friend and a close family friend, who came to teach at the University of Crete. He was a professor, he had just received his PhD from Columbia University, and he came back to Greece to teach for a couple of years. And he taught a course on secure system design or something to that effect. And I just fell in love with that class. We then did the project together that ended up becoming a standard for NIST. And then it kind of went from there. He said, you should do grad school, introduced me to my advisor, and off it went. It kind of, at that point, I feel like I was in a specific path.